Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this video in which we are going to be looking at Totemic Restoration Shaman played on the 12.1 PTR in a Mythic Plus environment, specifically here in a level 15 Altar of Fangs dungeon in Season 2. This is the all-new dungeon for Season 2 and it is incidentally also arguably the most difficult one, or certainly one of the most difficult ones, driven in large part by this first area of the dungeon where damage is very high and that really requires you to be on your toes as a healer. Generally speaking, the gameplay which you see here is likely going to be extremely similar to the gameplay that is going to be going live with Season 2, as most of the tuning on the PTR has already concluded, and especially that is the case from a gameplay perspective, where we should not expect any major gameplay changes to be heading our way, with some potential tuning adjustments potentially still happening. That is especially the case for shamans, because shamans are the class that is seeing the fewest amount of changes by a significant margin in Season 2, as your tier set does not really materially change how the class is supposed to be played. What your tier set does is that each time you cast Healing Wave or Chain Heal, you will spawn an area of Healing Rain underneath the target, or you will have a chance to spawn an area of Healing Rain underneath the target, as our tank almost gets one shot here from the Ravenous Descendants. And you can see we have 3 Healing Rains here, so I had some procs from my set, and so you have these multiple Healing Rains layered on top of each other, and their healing also stacks, which is even further amplified by your Forset, which then makes Healing Rain provide shields to players, very small shields, to players standing inside of its area as well. This has 2 consequences. The first one is that when your players are stacked up inside of multiple Healing Rain areas, then your AoE healing that it is provided by these Healing Rains is very, very strong. So from a pure throughput perspective, if you manage to stack up players inside these areas, Shaman is in a very good position. But as a second consequence, this also means that Shaman is tuned around the possibility of having multiple Healing Rains and having multiple players standing inside of those multiple Healing Rains, as you can see is the case here. This means that Shaman is undertuned when you play in a group, in a pug for example, where this stacking does not occur. So say you have 3 range DPS, yourself and the tank, and the range DPS stand all over. Then you have your tier set proc, okay, and there's a Healing Rain spawning underneath the mage, upon which he runs out of it, because that's just what happens. And then you maybe have another one under the druid, who is also standing in Narnia. And what happens is that the power inherent to the Healing Rains, which are stackable, is not being harnessed. And then you can have a very hard time healing as a Restoration Shaman, because your throughput potential is dependent on players standing inside Healing Rain, and ideally inside of multiple versions of Healing Rain. And I've run into trouble with Shaman from a throughput perspective when that is not the case. I can remember especially vividly on the 3rd boss in the Blinding Veil, he applies a bleed debuff to your entire party, and the debuff only disappears once it is dispelled, which Shamans can't do, or it is the player is fully healed. And yeah, granted, I had to use some of my cooldowns beforehand, so I was a bit dry on healing, but because players were all over the place, I was not able to clear the debuff from a throughput perspective, because yeah, you are required to harness some of the power from Healing Rain in order to be able to deliver strong throughput. So if you're planning to pug in Season 2 as a Restoration Shaman, make your own keys, build them around melee heavy comps, in which case Shamans are a pretty strong healer, I would say. If you are mainly pugging by queuing into other groups, obviously you can also look for combinations where there are more melee players inside them already, or if you're looking to play at the very highest level of play as a pug, then that can also work, of course, because players will be better suited to play around your needs. A second ago here, you saw a Piercing Hiss cast go off from these serpent guys. And these casts are Blizzard's attempt, I think, to more strongly incentivize DPS players to play dungeon mechanics, because when the cast goes through, it's a 50% haste debuff to the entire party. However, I think that the cast just does too much damage. It's basically a one-shot, especially at the higher key levels, especially because the 50% haste debuff is also applied to the healer, so you will have a very hard time healing the group back up afterwards, and these pulls already have a ton of AoE damage in them to start with. So basically, it doesn't really change that much. I would much prefer it if this was designed in such a way that, there is this haste debuff that comes with it. If it's not being kicked, DPS lose their ability to deal damage, and that's it, rather than it also being just another almost one-shot to the entire party, in which case the haste debuff is just, not particularly relevant. From an overall throughput perspective, then, I would say shamans are pretty strong if the healing rain conditions are met. I think shamans are especially strong, and we are going to see that later in the key, at delivering an extremely high amount of healing in a very short time. So, for example, if there's a massive overpull with some mistakes in terms of interrupts and so on, you can definitely scale up to 500k, 600k HPS for a short time, however, leaving you a little bit vulnerable afterwards because you don't have any additional totems available. So the ramping up of healing power of shamans is a little bit short-lived in that regard. But definitely, throughput-wise, if played correctly and the entire team playing around it, on the stronger side. Now, the healing rain positioning and players standing close is also relevant from a damage dealing perspective, because the healing rains procced by your tier set also trigger acid rain. So if you have multiple healing rains underneath your enemies, then you will deal damage via acid rain multiple times as well. So everything in the end comes back to exactly this. As we fight the first boss here, this is also a fight that is a bit challenging for shamans in particular, because there is a lot of movement required, and the tank needs to tank him at a bone pile at the side of the room where there is no meat on it, so none of these dead dragons is lying on top of them. Otherwise, the boss will enrage, and especially when enraged while casting his scavenging cast, which he is doing now, which deals group damage until the shield is DPS'd off, is very dangerous. So definitely a lot of movement required on the side of the tank, but also from the other players who need to play some soak mechanics on the ground, spread out with these circles and dodge some ground effects, as well as this frontal here, which is pretty well telegraphed, although the poisons spewed forward with this frontal are much bigger than the telegraphing would indicate. So you can definitely expect multiple players to be hit by that all of the time. Although, of course, this is going to change once players develop a greater familiarity with the dungeon pool. Generally speaking, though, this boss, once you get the hang of it, despite its relatively high HPS requirements, is not super difficult. It becomes problematic primarily if your group DPS is too low to damage down the shield very quickly, or if your tank just rolls over. That's obviously also difficult, especially for shamans, because you're single target healing especially from sort of an emergency perspective, delivering a high amount of single target healing to the tank, difficult. You don't really have any good tools for doing that. So yeah, you also saw that in the beginning of the dungeon, where I had to use my Spirit Link totem, because that is essentially your only real lifesaver for the tank taking an overwhelming amount of damage. As we move here into the next area of the dungeon, which is where the poison madness starts, and shamans, they are, on the one hand, they are very strong against poisons, because Poison Cleansing Totem is arguably the best spell against poisons that there is in the game. But on the other hand, they cannot dispel poisons outside of the Poison Cleansing Totem, and it is a 2-minute cooldown. So you can see now the DK has 4 stacks of the poison applied to him, and I cannot dispel that. So it needs to be healed off. Should have moved my Earth Shield previously. 3 stacks on the warrior, and he also passes away, sadly. But this poison fiasco that you're witnessing right now is mostly a misery of our own making, because you can see these envenom casts going through. I also should be doing a better job at interrupting them, but unfortunately Plater is broken, or used to be, not quite sure, maybe they fixed it, on the PTR, and Plater is what I usually use for my nameplates, and the Blizzard nameplates are just so atrocious that I have a very hard time interrupting the enemies, because first of all, everything looks the same. Then they are very difficult to click. Then the enemies have the exact same color as the DK, which also a bit suboptimal in my opinion. Yeah, so there is an interrupt on my part, but definitely fewer than I would like to see myself put out. But that won't be a problem on live, but just goes to show once again that Blizzard's war on add-ons has sort of failed, because their base UI solutions are just not competitive enough, although cooldown manager and so on are decent solutions in my opinion, and they are getting progressively better. I, for one, was someone who kind of liked the idea of an add-on purge, because it's a huge barrier to entry, and I think if everybody has the same playing field, then it's okay for there to be fewer add-ons. As we have 2 Mass Envenoms going off here, Poison Cleansing Totem should be used, but I don't. Okay, they ran out. I used Spirit Link and put out massive amounts of totems here. Yeah, there was definitely some failures in here, but you can see 500k HPS roughly, because we just put down everything that we had. Healing Tide, Storm Stream, Healing Stream, and then spam Chain Heal, and yeah, cross your fingers. Could have solved this much more simply by immediately using Poison Cleansing Totem, but yeah, I was not quick enough with that from a mental perspective. So yeah, but definitely goes to show what I was talking about earlier, that Shaman is probably more so than any other healer able to overcome massive damage in a very short time frame, leaving them vulnerable afterwards. Now we have the next boss here, the Writhing Coil, pretty much uneventful. Good opportunity to point out a bug on the PTR that seems to be present for shamans, and hopefully it won't go live like this. You can see here my Whirling Water buff will be there in a second again once I place my next Surging Totem on the ground. Here it goes. There's the Whirling Water buff. Usually you cast a Healing Wave on a player, and another player inside of the Healing Rain area that you have active will be healed, consuming the Whirling Water buff and essentially cleave healing 2 targets using it. It doesn't seem to be working, and it hasn't been working from day 1 on the PTR. Maybe I should have sent more than one bug report about it. In any event, this yeah, sort of relatively significantly weakens shamans on the PTR. because this is simply not working, but it's always with each surging totem essentially an additional healing wave, which also probably, I would think, also has an additional chance of granting a proc of your tier set. So it's a non-negligible loss of power that Whirling Water seems to be just not working at all. But yeah, we'll see if that will be a problem on live. I would suspect that it won't be. The boss here puts a poison debuff on players. Actually, it's not poison, it's undispellable, but it's sort of mirrors the poisons from before, even has the same symbol. And you can see that here you can see one of Shaman's strength, because this poison's damage is not very low, actually, but Shaman has such strong background healing from your totems, from your healing rain and so on, that it seems very underwhelming here. Having played the encounter on other healers, I will say that this poison felt significantly more dangerous, albeit not super dangerous. So yeah, it goes to show that for some rot damage, of which there is a lot, so low impact rot damage, Shamans are probably the most excellent healer in Season 2, or at least close to it. Maybe monks can compete, because by virtue of their rotation healing with every hit, they obviously are also very well suited for dealing with some very low AoE damage. As we move on here into the last area of the dungeon, where you need to clear these totems around the mini-boss, and playing the mini-boss, which is locked right now, is also strictly required for progressing into the next area of the dungeon. So it's not a choice pulling and clearing these, pulling these mobs and clearing these totems is therefore unavoidable. But generally speaking, compared to the previous areas of the dungeon, I would say this one is a bit of a step back in terms of difficulty. You can see there's hardly anything to heal, despite the fact that we are not doing the greatest job at clearing the envenoms. And I would generally also say, interrupting the envenoms, I would generally also say that yes, not having a poison dispel is a significant disadvantage in Season 2, but for the most part, the poisons are not so dangerous that you cannot compete without having a dispel. So anyone wanting to play Shaman and worrying about the downtime between your poison cleansing totems, or any priest players among you, don't get fully discouraged by poisons being a thing in Season 2, and they definitely are. There are poisons all over the place. For the most part, you will still be able to do a decent job healing, but at the very highest levels of play, or when you get very unlucky with the targeting of spells, so that, for example, as the DK did earlier, there's a player with 4 stacks of a poison and you can't dispel that, then obviously you will have a disadvantage. But generally speaking, yeah, it's okay to play what you enjoy the most, and for the most part, the poisons are not that big of a deal. As we have a real, seem to be having real trouble here clearing these hatchlings. Usually the DPS just burst them down pretty quickly in my experience, and they have a fixate mechanic, so I would very much appreciate being rid of them. And yeah, I remember being very confused in this fight why these AoE little mobs are not dying much more quickly, because from my previous experiences playing this dungeon, they just absolutely explode. Probably DPS players saving their cooldowns to pad some damage, but in this case, unusually low damage on them. As we move into the final area of the dungeon, which I don't like as much for reasons which will become apparent in a second here. So you have these chosen ones, and they have living venoms, these little green blobs around them. And they essentially are similar to the exploding shields in my Sara Caverns, that once the shield was damaged through, then there was a big explosion. And here, when they die, there is a big explosion. Should be happening any second now. Yeah, there you can see, boom, boom. And everybody is almost dead. Not the mechanic that I enjoy the most. I think the shield mechanic was even somewhat superior, because as a healer you could exert some agency over the process by dispelling them one by one, if you had the time for doing that, and obviously if you had played a healer that is able to do that. Here the onus is completely on the DPS players to make that happen, and yeah, you are at the mercy of them. You can put down a spirit link, I suppose, before they explode, if you see that it's the problem. But on the hierarchy levels, it's just going to one-shot the group if multiple of them go off at the same time. So yeah, not a fan of it, especially not a fan of it being at the very end of the dungeon, because yeah, we have another piercing hiss go off here for the haste reduction, which I was talking about earlier. Because I just don't like when these group failure mechanics are placed at the very end. It invalidates too much time of the players, in my opinion. Although, to be fair, the beginning of the dungeon is also very difficult. If the beginning section of this dungeon was at the end, I'm not quite sure if that would be the correct solution. But the same is also true for the last boss, and we're actually going to see that in a second here, because you would think that this key is in time, but wait and see, because we only have this one pack left right now. Also this pack, one of the most challenging packs in the dungeon, because it has one of these chosen ones, but also these chieftains doing the AoE healing absorb, as well as these other mobs doing the yeah, I don't know, single target debuff, which deals a little bit of damage. So here you can see the AoE from the chosen one is going off, and then the healing absorb layered on top of it. So we as the healer are definitely needed here to use some cooldowns to deliver some very high amounts of healing. You can see me using, not playing around, using my healing tide totem in the beginning here. Here's time for poison cleansing totem, and once again the AoE damage layers on top of the healing absorb, on top of the single target debuffs from the other ones. And yeah, a little bit close, probably could have played that a little bit better as well, but yeah, expect to deliver an absolute boatload of healing here in the end, in the final pack. As we realize that we are missing some percent, and yeah, this goes to illustrate problems here with the dungeon, in my opinion. So I think, okay, Demon Hunter was running back. I think we are running back, but apparently we are not. Now he wants to do the boss, which is fine, but he pulls the boss, and you can see these beams at the side, and they need to be soaked, and if they are not, the group will just wipe immediately. And yeah, I was not there when the pull was happening, so everybody is just dead. And this can of course also happen just when fighting. If there's a problem that someone is not soaking one of these beams, then your run is over. I like the end boss in Halls of Atonement, I suppose. I'm not the biggest fan of that being in the end of a dungeon. We're gonna skip ahead here a little bit as we kill these two, but this is not enough for 2%. And then we go to the boss again. Yeah, and we are going to look at the boss fight, and in the end we fail timing the key for these reasons. Okay, here you can see how it's supposed to work. Everybody is standing in one of those beams. The 4 players soaking the beams will get these debuffs, and these debuffs are special in that they are going to kill you when they run out. So you need to dispel them, but you cannot dispel them, and they are undispellable. So they are being dispelled by the players who are affected by the debuff standing inside of the bone slicer. You can see it's on me. Druid is moving in back here, and we get this debuff that does a ton of damage, but once this X debuff runs out, the other debuffs will clear as well. Now the warrior is still remaining, it's on him as well, so this one should only be soaked by the warrior, which it is, and he is also clearing the debuff then himself. Now we need to move back into the middle to play the soaking mechanic again, and that's basically the fight. So yeah, not overly difficult, but definitely quite a bit to heal, but yeah, high failure potential if players do not soak these beams, because then the fight will just be over immediately. And yeah, I think where to use your cooldowns, probably more so on the Bone Slicer, because it's just at the more chaotic part of the fight. I think the beams from the sides, at least on this key level, can quite reasonably comfortably be healed without the cooldowns as well. And again, we cycle into clearing our debuffs here. So moving back to Shaman then, I love Shaman. I think the specialization is in a great place, which is also why I don't at all mind that we are not seeing any major changes. Do I like the tier set very much? Meh. It's okay. I actually would have preferred a little bit of a different approach to the tier set. I think it's a bit too restrictive in terms of requiring players to be stacked up, which is, from a pugging perspective, just something that is not particularly desirable to start with. But if you can manage to get into a melee group, then it feels really cool to play. And you also deal a lot of damage with the healing rain, and you have tons of background healing going on, and that can feel very powerful. So yeah, depends on whom you're playing with and how much you mind being restricted in this way, as our Demon Hunter goes offline to round out an absolute catastrophe of an ending to this dungeon, as I try to save us here, get us across with my Spirit Link totem, which I do manage to do. And yeah, the Demon Hunter comes back in a second, and we fail to time the key because we can't kill this Chosen One back here in time. I think there's even some additional players dying from the exploding venom. So yeah, an absolute fiasco here at the end. I hope you found the video reasonably interesting. You've got an initial impression of what shamans can and can't do in Season 2. And maybe you can gauge from that if the shaman playstyle is something that, yeah, okay, as our Demon Hunter just absolutely implodes, is something that you would find enjoyable in the coming season. With that being said, thank you very much for watching, and please subscribe and like if you found the video useful. Helps a lot, especially at this point where this channel is not monetized yet. Yeah, thank you everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.